This here is the mighty Macquarie River. These days it's a bit of a mecca for four-wheel drivers and campers alike, and it's easy to understand why. It's a beautiful place. Now this was actually discovered in 1812 by the first European to get out here, and that was a bloke by the name of George Evans. And in 1828, a bloke you probably have heard of, Captain Charles Sturt, well, he was given the job of charting the river and finding the outer limits of the colony. This was the first of many successful expeditions by Sturt, and some of those expeditions included some pretty amazing discoveries.
But along with those discoveries, Sturt also faced severe hardship, mortal danger, starvation, thirst, and ultimately tragedy.
Join me as we go and follow in Sturt's footsteps.
In this episode, I'm starting my journey on the Macquarie River near Hill End in New South Wales, and I'll be visiting the Murrumbidgee and the Darling before our final destination at the confluence of the Murray and Darling rivers in the border town of Wentworth. Charles Napier Sturt was born on the 28th of April 1795 in Bengal in India. One of 13 children to Thomas Lennox Napier Sturt and Jeanette Wilson. At the age of 5, Charles was sent to live with relatives in England, and at 15 he entered the prestigious Harrow School. When he turned 18, Sturt gained a commission as ensign in the 39th Regiment of Foot, and he served in the Pyrenees late in the Peninsular War, and then in Canada fighting against the Americans.
There are a whole bunch of small misfortunes that seemed to dog Sturt's early life, and then he was sent to Europe where he just missed out on fighting in the famous battle at Waterloo. Sturt spent 3 years with the occupying army in France before being shifted off to Ireland, where he was promoted to lieutenant, and then not too long after, in December of 1825, he was promoted to captain.
Exactly 1 year later, Sturt set sail with a detachment of his regiment on the convict ship Mariner and arrived in the colony of Sydney in May of 1827.
Now, Sturt soon realised after he arrived in Sydney that there are a couple of things that everyone was harping on about. The first one was politics, and he definitely didn't have too much of an interest in that, let me tell you. But the other one did catch his interest, and that was exploring what lay beyond the settled districts of Sydney and the surrounding areas. And that's something he really wanted to go and find out a little bit more about.
But even though the Governor of New South Wales, Sir Ralph Darling, had agreed to Sturt's request to head off on an expedition into the new nation's unknown interior, he didn't formally sign off on Sturt's request for more than a year later.
It was around this time that Sturt decided he wanted to head inland, and he had a chat about his desire to do so with the newly appointed Surveyor General, Sir Thomas Mitchell.
Old mate Mitchell felt that he'd been overlooked by Darling, who'd chosen Sturt, who, in Mitchell's eyes, hadn't really done enough to lead an expedition.
Now, of course, Darling dismissed Mitchell's complaints, and because of this, and quite unfairly I reckon, Sturt gained a lifelong enemy in old mate Mitchell.
Before Sturt headed off on his first expedition, he wrote to Mitchell, asking his advice which route Mitchell thought would be the best to follow. Mitchell's response was,
"Having clearly understood from His Majesty's government that I was likely to be employed on a journey into the interior, it is not very natural that I should be glad that the Governor here is determined to send another person on a service which has been considered to belong to the office of my predecessor."
Despite Mitchell's bluntness, he did at least offer Sturt some help.
To you individually, however, I shall be glad to contribute any assistance or advice in my power.
On the 4th of November 1828, Sturt finally received the approval from Darling to trace the course of the Macquarie River.
While Sturt set about putting his party together to go and explore the Macquarie, there was a name there that really stood out, and that name is Hume. You'll obviously recognise that name by the Hume Highway, and that's because Hume and another bloke by the name of Hovell, they'd already led a couple of pretty successful expeditions, and one of those was to make a way from Sydney down to the settlement of Melbourne. Of course, we know that as the Hume Highway today.
Sturt and Hume became lifelong friends, and Hume's ability to negotiate with Aboriginal people was never better shown than on this journey.